Welcome to the story. Don't forget to like, subscribe and support me. The night sky over the city was unusually clear, with the stars twinkling above like they were indifferent to the chaos brewing below. Ethan Cole sat in his dimly lit apartment, fingers dancing across the keyboard as his computer screen bathed his face in a cold, blue glow. He'd been at this for hours, eyes bloodshot and pulse racing, but he was close, too close to turn back now. It started as just another late-night coding session, tinkering with a few back-end updates for the tech startup he worked at. Ethan wasn't particularly invested in the company or the upcoming election that had the nation glued to their screens. But that night, he stumbled upon something that sent a chill down his spine. At first, it was just a curious line of code embedded deep within the company's servers. The system they were working on was contracted by a private firm supposedly involved in improving voter turnout and data analysis for the election. Nothing suspicious on the surface, but this piece of code. It didn't belong. Ethan's experience as a programmer had taught him when something didn't feel right. This was one of those times. Why would voter data need this kind of encryption? He muttered to himself, a sinking feeling gnawed at him as he delved deeper, unraveling what looked like a hidden directive. As the minutes ticked by, he realized it wasn't just voter data. The system was interfacing with a neural network, one that could potentially manipulate human behavior through brainwave patterns. His mind raced. Holy! This is... No way! It couldn't be real, could it? Manipulating brainwaves. It sounded like something ripped straight out of a bad science fiction novel. But the more he dug, the more the pieces began to fit. The data showed how certain frequencies could be targeted at individuals to subtly push them toward making unconscious decisions. Decisions like, say, voting for a particular candidate. Suddenly, a warning flashed across his screen. Unauthorized access detected. He froze. Someone had noticed him poking around where he didn't belong. His heart thudded in his chest as the screen flashed red. A countdown timer signaling an impending system lockout. He frantically unplugged the Ethernet cable, severing the connection just in time. The silence that followed was suffocating. His phone buzzed on the desk. Ethan glanced at it, dreading what he might see. It was a number he didn't recognize, but he knew exactly who it was. He picked up the phone, trying to keep his voice steady. "Hello?" A cold, measured voice answered. "You should stop now, Mr. Cole, before you go too far." The call ended before he could respond. Ethan stared at the phone, mind racing. They knew. They were watching him. Ethan didn't sleep that night. Every time he closed his eyes, he imagined black SUVs pulling up outside, faceless agents dragging him away in the dead of night. He was sure he'd been marked, but the question was, what did they want to do about it? He needed answers, and he needed help. The next morning, after pacing his apartment for hours, he reached out to the only person he could trust, Lena. Lena was a brilliant hacker and an old friend. She worked in cybersecurity and had the kind of skills Ethan needed if he was going to make sense of what he'd uncovered. They hadn't spoken much lately, but this wasn't something he could handle alone. He dialed her number and hoped she'd pick up. After a few rings, she answered. "Ethan, haven't heard from you in a while. What's up?" Her voice was casual, like they'd just spoken the day before. She had no idea what he was about to drag her into. "I need your help," he said, trying to keep his voice calm. "Something's come up. It's serious." There was a pause. Lena wasn't the type to scare easily, but she could sense the tension in his voice. "Alright, I'm listening." Later that day, Ethan met Lena at a small cafe copyright downtown. They sat in the back corner, away from the windows. He explained everything of what he'd found, the hidden code, the brainwave manipulation technology, and the phone call. Lena listened intently, her face expressionless as she processed the information. When he was finished, she leaned back in her chair, arms crossed. "Brainwave manipulation? You sure about this, Ethan?" "This sounds insane." "I know it does. But I saw the code. I saw what it was doing. They're using it to control people, Lena. To make them vote for whoever they want. This election is a complete sham, she sighed, glancing around the cafe. Copyright as if expecting someone to be listening in. And now they're after you. Ethan nodded. Yeah, I don't know how long I have before they make their move, but I need to get ahead of this. I need proof of something I can use to expose them. Lena tapped her fingers on the table, deep in thought. Finally, she leaned in closer, her voice low. I can help you. But we're going to have to be smart about this. If what you're saying is true, they won't hesitate to take you out to protect their operation. I know, Ethan said, swallowing the lump in his throat. I'm in deep already. There's no turning back. Over the next few days, Ethan and Lena worked tirelessly to dig deeper into the conspiracy. Lena hacked into encrypted servers, pulling out files and documents that confirmed what Ethan had suspected. The brainwave technology was real, and it was being used to influence voters on a massive scale. The government, in collusion with several powerful corporations, had developed the technology in secret. Their candidate was a puppet, controlled by unseen forces. Ethan felt sick to his stomach. Democracy wasn't just broken, it had been stolen right out from under the people's noses. As they gathered more evidence, Ethan's paranoia grew. Every time he left his apartment, he felt like he was being watched. His phone calls were monitored, his emails flagged. Someone was tracking him, and it was only a matter of time before they made their move. Then, one night, everything came crashing down. Ethan was asleep when the sound of breaking glass jolted him awake. He sat up, heart pounding. In the darkness, he could see the outline of a figure standing in the doorway. Without thinking, he grabbed the baseball bat he kept by the bed and swung wildly. The figure ducked, and before Ethan could react, he was tackled to the ground. A rough hand clamped over his mouth, silencing his screams. His eyes darted around the room in terror. Shut up, a voice hissed in his ear. Ethan thrashed, trying to break free, but the man was too strong. He felt cold steel press against his neck, a knife. His body went rigid. Move, and I'll cut you, the man growled. Ethan stopped struggling. His mind raced, searching for a way out. The man dragged him to his feet, forcing him to the window. Outside, he could see a black SUV idling by the curb, headlights off. We're going for a ride, the man said, his voice dripping with menace. Just as the man opened the window to haul Ethan out, there was a loud bang. The door burst open, and Lena stood there, holding a gun. She fired once, hitting the man in the shoulder. He screamed, dropping the knife and clutching his wound. Come on, Lena shouted, grabbing Ethan's arm and pulling him toward the door. They ran, bolting down the stairs and out into the street. The SUV roared to life, tires screeching as it sped after them. Ethan's heart pounded in his chest as they darted through alleyways, ducking into shadows and trying to lose their pursuers. Ethan's legs burned as he and Lena sprinted through the darkened streets, weaving between alleyways, barely ahead of the SUV roaring behind them. The screech of tires echoed off the buildings, and the headlights cast long, menacing shadows, reminding Ethan that they were only moments away from being caught. His mind raced, struggling to come up with a plan. But every escape route they tried seemed to lead to a dead end. Down here, Lena shouted, pulling him into a narrow alley that seemed impossibly tight for the SUV to follow. They ducked into the shadows, pressing themselves against the cold, damp brick walls, breathing heavily as the vehicle screeched to a halt just outside the alley's entrance. For a moment, silence hung in the air, save for their ragged breaths. Ethan listened, his pulse pounding in his ears, as two car doors slammed. The sound of footsteps approached, slow and methodical, the agents clearly confident that they had their prey cornered. We need to move, Ethan whispered, his voice barely audible, as he looked at Lena. She nodded, her eyes sharp with adrenaline. She peeked around the corner, her grip tightening on the gun she'd fired just moments earlier. Ethan had no idea where she'd gotten it, but right now, He was thankful she had. "There's a fire escape at the end of the alley," she said quietly. "If we can get up to the roof, we might have a chance." Ethan swallowed hard. "You think they'll follow?" Lena gave a grim smile. "They won't expect us to go up. They'll assume we're running to street level." They didn't have much time to debate it. The footsteps were getting closer. Ethan's heart was hammering in his chest as they made a break for it, darting to the end of the alley. The metal ladder of the fire escape loomed ahead, barely illuminated by the faint glow of a distant street lamp. Lena grabbed the first rung and began climbing swiftly. Ethan followed, his muscles screaming in protest. They reached the roof just as the agents turned the corner into the alley. Ethan dared a glance down and saw them pointing, one of them barking orders into a radio. In a few minutes, backup would arrive, and they'd be surrounded. Lena didn't wait for him to catch his breath. She was already sprinting across the roof, looking for their next move. Ethan followed, his lungs burning. As they reached the edge of the building, Lena skidded to a halt and pointed across the gap to the next roof, only a few feet away. "We have to jump." Ethan's stomach lurched. "Are you serious? You got a better idea?" He didn't. Ethan took a deep breath, backed up a few steps, and ran. His feet pounded against the gravel-covered rooftop, and as he reached the edge, he pushed off as hard as he could. For a split second, he felt weightless, suspended in the air between buildings. Then his feet hit the opposite roof, and he rolled, barely managing to stay upright. Lena landed beside him a moment later, already moving again. "We need to get to a secure location. They'll be scanning the area soon." "Traffic cams, drones, everything." Ethan nodded, forcing his legs to keep up with her pace. They crossed 2 more buildings before Lena finally slowed, crouching behind a large vent. She pulled out her phone and quickly typed something, her fingers moving with precision and speed that made it clear she was no stranger to this kind of situation. "Got a safe house nearby," she said, barely glancing up. "We can regroup there." Ethan didn't ask questions. He trusted Lena. She'd just saved his life, and right now, that was all the assurance he needed. They spent the next half hour sneaking through back streets, avoiding cameras, and staying out of sight until they reached a small, unmarked building at the edge of the industrial district. Lena keyed in a code on the door, and they slipped inside. It was dark, musty, and sparsely furnished. She had just the bare essentials. But it was safe, and for now, that was enough. Ethan collapsed onto an old couch, his chest heaving. "What the hell just happened?" "They're after you, Ethan." "That's what happened," Lena said flatly as she locked the door behind her. "You got too close. They can't afford to let you expose what they're doing." He rubbed his face, trying to process everything. "I thought I was just, I don't know, blowing the whistle. I didn't expect them to send people to kill me." "Well, now you know how far they're willing to go to keep this secret," Lena said. She moved to a small table, spreading out a map of the city. "We need a new plan. We have some evidence, but it's not enough. We need something bigger, something that can bring the whole system down." Ethan leaned forward, feeling the weight of the task settle heavily on his shoulders. "How do we do that?" "They've got the resources, the tech." Lena tapped the map. "I've been thinking, if we can get into their main server, the heart of the system where they control the brainwave technology, we can pull out everything. We can broadcast it to the public, leak it to the world." There'd been no denying it. Ethan frowned. "And where exactly is this server?" Lena looked at him, her expression grim. "It's in a government facility, high security." "We'll need help." Ethan's stomach knotted. He knew this wasn't going to be easy, but breaking into a government building? That felt like suicide. "We don't have a choice," Lena continued, as if reading his thoughts. "If we don't stop them, this election will be rigged forever. The people will never know they've been manipulated." He knew she was right, and that terrified him. But what terrified him more was the idea of doing nothing. 2 days later, they met with a group known only as the Ghosts. Lena had made contact with them through one of her underground channels. They were a collective of hackers, activists, and tech-savvy individuals who had been quietly watching the election unfold, suspicious of its legitimacy. When Ethan and Lena laid out what they had discovered, the ghosts agreed to help. The plan was simple in theory but dangerously complex in execution: infiltrate the government facility, access the central server, and extract the data that proved the brainwave manipulation conspiracy. Then, broadcast it to the world in real time, forcing the truth out into the open. Ethan spent the next few days preparing, both mentally and physically. He was no soldier, but he knew that he couldn't afford to fail. Lena drilled him on every possible contingency, running through the security protocols they'd need to bypass, the backup plans in case things went sideways. When the day of the operation finally arrived, Ethan felt a mix of dread and determination. There was no turning back. The facility was heavily fortified, just as they had expected. Ethan and Lena, along with a few members of the ghosts, moved in under the cover of darkness, using every ounce of stealth and hacking skills they had to bypass the outer security. They moved like shadows, avoiding detection as they made their way to the server room. The tension in the air was palpable. Every step felt like it could be their last. But after what felt like an eternity, they reached the door to the server room. Ethan's heart pounded in his chest as Lena worked on the lock, her fingers flying over the keypad. "Almost there," she whispered. Suddenly, the sound of footsteps echoed down the hallway. Ethan froze, his mind racing. They were so close. They couldn't get caught now. The lock clicked open just as the guards rounded the corner. Lena shoved the door open, pulling Ethan inside before the guards could spot them. They were in. Ethan didn't waste a second. He rushed to the main terminal, plugging in the drive that the ghosts had provided. His fingers flew across the keyboard, navigating the complex encryption with the help of Lena's instructions. The files began downloading. Seconds felt like hours as the data trickled in. The tension was unbearable, but Ethan kept his focus. Finally, the download completed. "We got it," he whispered. Lena nodded, her face pale but determined. "Now let's get the hell out of here." The broadcast went live later that night, just hours before the election was set to begin. The truth was revealed to millions of people across the nation. The brainwave manipulation, the hidden code, the corporate control, it was all there for the world to see. The response was immediate. Protests erupted. People flooded the streets, demanding answers. The government scrambled to contain the chaos, but it was too late. The conspiracy had been exposed, and there was no going back. Ethan and Lena watched it unfold from their safe house, exhausted but victorious. For the first time in days, Ethan allowed himself to breathe. "We did it," he said, barely able to believe it. Lena smiled, but there was a sadness in her eyes. "Yeah, but this is just the beginning. There's still a long way to go." Ethan knew she was right. The fight wasn't over. But for now, they had won a crucial battle. And that was enough.